The imperial palace of Zephyria stretched across 3 moons, its crystalline spires piercing the void between worlds like frozen lightning. Within its heart lay the Chamber of Sorrows, where Emperor Kethvar's most precious companion dwelt in perpetual anguish. Sarah Martinez pressed her cleaning cloth against the viewing portal, watching the magnificent creature within writhe in obvious distress. The dragon, though she suspected it wasn't truly a dragon by Earth standards, was larger than an old Boeing 747, with scales that shifted from deep emerald to midnight black depending on its mood. Right now, those scales rippled with waves of silver gray, the color of grief. Every night for the past 6 months since Sarah's arrival as part of the human servant exchange program, she had witnessed this scene. The Emperor's beloved companion would curl into itself, massive head tucked beneath wings that could blot out stars, and emit the most heartbreaking sound she had ever heard. It wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a song. It was pure, distilled sorrow that seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the palace. Still watching the beast human, Sarah turned to see Vextari, one of the Zephyrian courtiers, approaching with his typical sneer. His elongated skull gleamed under the chamber's bioluminescent lighting, and his 4 arms gestured dismissively at the viewing portal. "She's not a beast," Sarah replied quietly, continuing her cleaning. "She's in pain." Vextari corrected with emphasis. "The creature has no gender, no true sentience as we understand it. It is merely the Emperor's pet bred for war and decoration. The nightly sounds are simply an animal response to captivity." Sarah bit back her response. In her 6 months here, she had learned that contradicting the Zephyrian nobility was unwise. Humans were tolerated as curiosities, their strange resilience and adaptability making them useful for dangerous cleaning tasks and maintenance work that even the hardy Zephyrians found challenging. But they were not expected to have opinions about imperial matters. As Vextari glided away on his anti-grav platform, Sarah returned her attention to the dragon. The creature's massive eye, easily the size of a dinner plate, had opened and was fixed directly on her. For a moment, Sarah felt a jolt of connection, as if something vast and ancient was looking directly into her soul. The dragon's crying intensified, but now there seemed to be a different quality to it. Where before there had been only despair, Sarah detected something else. Hope, recognition, she couldn't be sure, but the feeling made her heart race. "What's wrong with you, beautiful?" she whispered to the glass. "What are you trying to tell us?" The next morning brought the usual routine. Sarah joined the other human servants in the meal hall, a sparse chamber where they were provided with nutrition cubes and recycled water. The Zephyrians considered human dietary requirements primitive but manageable. "Anyone else think that dragon's getting louder?" asked Marcus, a former Marine who now maintained the palace's defensive systems. His scarred hands shook slightly as he lifted his water ration, a side effect of the neural dampeners all human servants were required to wear. "Definitely," agreed Chen, a former engineer who now cleaned the reactor cores. "Last night I swear I felt the vibrations 3 levels down." Sarah nodded but said nothing. She had been thinking about the dragon all night, and a crazy idea was beginning to form. During her years as a veterinarian on Earth, she had seen animals in distress for countless reasons. But the dragon's behavior reminded her of something specific: maternal anxiety. Her duties that day took her through sections of the palace she rarely visited. The Zephyrians were meticulous record keepers, and their data crystals lined vast walls in perfect geometric patterns. Most were secured behind energy barriers, but the older historical archives were considered less sensitive. During her lunch break, Sarah lingered in one such archive chamber. Her neural dampener prevented her from accessing most Zephyrian technology directly, but she had learned to read their basic historical notation system. The symbols were complex, but certain patterns had become familiar. She found what she was looking for in a crystal marked with the imperial seal and dates spanning several decades. The information made her blood run cold. Emperor Kethvar's dragon wasn't just a pet or a weapon. According to the records, she had been a mother. 3 years ago, she had laid a clutch of 5 eggs in the palace's breeding chambers. But something had gone wrong. The eggs had been removed for security reasons and placed in a separate facility for observation. None had hatched successfully. The dragon had been searching for her children ever since. Sarah's hands trembled as she replaced the crystal. The crying wasn't random animal behavior. It was a mother calling for Bobbies who would never answer. That evening, Sarah approached the Chamber of Sorrows with new purpose. She had spent hours thinking about what she had learned, and the moral implications were staggering. The most powerful empire in 3 galaxies was torturing a grieving mother simply through ignorance and indifference. The dragon was already in position, curled in her familiar pose of despair. But when Sarah approached the viewing portal, the massive creature lifted her head immediately. Those ancient eyes fixed on Sarah with unmistakable intelligence. "I know what happened to your bobbies," Sarah whispered to the glass. "I'm so sorry." The dragon's crying stopped abruptly. For the first time in months, the Chamber of Sorrows was silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. The dragon moved closer to the barrier, pressing her great snout against the transparent aluminum. Her scales shifted from gray to a soft, hopeful blue. "I don't know if I can help you," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "But I'm going to try. You shouldn't have to suffer like this." The dragon's eye blinked slowly, once, in what Sarah could only interpret as understanding. Then she settled back onto her resting platform and for the first time since Sarah's arrival at the palace, spent the night in silence. Word of the dragon's unusual quiet spread quickly through the palace the next morning. Emperor Kethvar himself arrived at the Chamber of Sorrows, accompanied by his chief advisors and several members of the Scientific Council. Sarah watched from a maintenance alcove as the group gathered around the viewing portal. "Explain this anomaly," the Emperor demanded. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, and his advisors clustered nervously around him. "The creature has never remained silent for an entire night cycle," reported the chief scientist, a thin Zephyrian whose cybernetic implants covered half his skull. "All biometric readings are normal. There is no indication of illness or system failure." "Perhaps it is finally adapting to captivity," suggested Vextari. "Wild creatures often undergo behavioral changes when properly domesticated." Sarah bit her tongue to keep from screaming. The dragon wasn't adapting. She was responding to the first being in 3 years who had acknowledged her grief. Emperor Kethvar studied the dragon through the portal. "Continue monitoring. If this behavior persists, we may be able to reduce the acoustic dampening fields in this section. The nightly disturbances have become inconvenient." As the Imperial entourage departed, Sarah caught a glimpse of the Emperor's expression. For just a moment, she saw something unexpected, genuine concern for the dragon's well-being. It gave her hope that her desperate plan might actually work. But first, she needed to learn more about what had happened to the dragon's eggs and whether any trace of them still existed. The answers, she suspected, lay in the restricted sections of the palace that no human servant had ever accessed. That night, Sarah made a decision that would either save a grieving mother or cost Sarah her life. She was going to break into the Imperial Genetic Archives and learn the complete truth about the dragon's lost children. And if possible, she was going to find a way to give the magnificent creature some measure of peace. The dragon seemed to sense her resolve. As Sarah cleaned the viewing portal one final time before her shift ended, the great creature approached the barrier and placed one massive claw against the glass. Sarah pressed her palm against the same spot, separated by inches of transparent aluminum, but connected by something far stronger than physical barriers. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous mission of her life. Tonight, she would let hope carry her through the darkness, just as the dragon was learning to do. Sarah's plan began 3 days later during the night shift rotation. She had spent those days memorizing guard patterns, studying palace schematics that were supposedly beyond human comprehension, and most importantly, building trust with the dragon. Each evening, she would spend her permitted break time near the Chamber of Sorrows. The dragon had begun responding to her presence with subtle changes in behavior, scales shifting to warmer colors, positioning herself closer to the viewing portal, and maintaining the blessed silence that had caught the entire palace's attention. "You're up to something," Marcus observed during their morning meal. His combat instincts, dulled but not eliminated by the neural dampener, had picked up on Sarah's nervous energy. "Just doing my job," Sarah replied, forcing herself to appear calm. But Chen, the engineer, was watching her with calculating eyes. "The atmospheric recycling systems have been acting weird lately," Chen said quietly. "Micro-fluctuations in the filtration chambers. Someone's been accessing areas they shouldn't." Sarah's heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. Chen was right. She had been using her maintenance duties to map the restricted sections of the palace, learning which corridors were monitored and which relied solely on physical barriers. "Must be system aging," she said. "These alien tech maintenance schedules are completely different from Earth standards." Chen nodded but continued watching her. Sarah realized she would have to be even more careful. Her fellow humans might be neural dampened, but they weren't stupid. That night, Sarah made her move. The palace operated on a complex cycle that accounted for the orbital patterns of its 3 moons, and she had calculated that the genetic archives would be at minimum staffing during the lunar convergence period that began at midnight. Her cleaning assignment took her to the lower levels, where the palace's most sensitive systems were housed. The genetic archives lay beyond a series of security checkpoints that should have been impossible for a human to breach. But Sarah had advantages that her captors didn't fully understand. The neural dampener that supposedly limited human cognitive function had an unexpected side effect. It made humans nearly invisible to many Zephyrian scanning systems. Their technology was designed to detect and respond to enhanced neural activity, not the dampened brainwaves of their servants. To their security systems, Sarah barely registered as a living being. She slipped past the first checkpoint during a guard rotation, hiding in the shadows while 2 Zephyrian sentries discussed the latest court gossip. Their forearmed gestures painted complex patterns in the air, a form of supplemental communication that Sarah was beginning to understand. The second checkpoint proved more challenging. It required biometric identification that Sarah obviously couldn't provide. But months of maintaining Zephyrian technology had taught her that their systems, while sophisticated, often had elegant simplicity at their core. She used her maintenance tools to access a diagnostic port, creating a false positive reading that suggested a routine system check was in progress. The archives themselves were vast, filled with genetic samples and experimental data spanning thousands of years of Zephyrian scientific advancement. Sarah moved carefully through the crystalline corridors, following the organizational system she had memorized from the historical records. She found the dragon's file in a section marked with warnings about dangerous biological materials. Her hands shook as she accessed the data crystal containing the complete record of the breeding program. The truth was worse than she had imagined. The dragon, whose name was Cyrillith according to the records, had been part of an experimental program to create enhanced war beasts. Her species was actually highly intelligent, capable of complex reasoning and deep emotional bonds. The Zephyrians had known this when they removed her eggs. But the true horror lay in the details of what had happened to those eggs. They hadn't failed to hatch naturally. They had been deliberately terminated as part of a research project studying the effects of psychological trauma on combat effectiveness. The scientists had wanted to understand how loss and grief might be weaponized. Sarah sank to her knees as the full implications hit her. Cyrillith wasn't just mourning her lost children. She was the victim of deliberate psychological torture disguised as scientific research. Fascinating reading, isn't it? Sarah spun around to find Emperor Kethvar standing in the archive entrance, flanked by 2 guards. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but the Emperor gestured for the guards to remain at a distance. "Your Majesty," Sarah stammered, unsure of the proper protocol for being caught in a restricted area by the ruler of an interstellar empire. "Please remain seated," the Emperor said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "I've been watching your activities with great interest. It took considerable skill to reach this location undetected." Sarah waited for the execution order, but instead, the Emperor approached and activated another data crystal. Holographic images filled the space around them, images of Cyrillith in her natural habitat, soaring through gas-giant atmospheres with others of her kind. "Her species is called the Nethasari," the Emperor explained. "They are among the most intelligent beings in known space, with lifespans measured in millennia and emotional depths that make our own feelings seem shallow by comparison. We acquired her during a territorial expansion 3 decades ago." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, confusion overwhelming her fear. The Emperor's expression was unreadable. "Because in 3 years of observation, no one, not my scientists, not my advisors, not I myself, understood what you recognized in a matter of months." She was calling for her children. Sarah found her courage. "The research project that killed her bobbies, did you know about it?" "No," the word came out flat and bitter. I authorized the removal of her eggs for safety reasons. I was told they had failed to develop. I only learned the truth tonight, after I began investigating the cause of her behavioral change. The Emperor's four hands clenched into fists. The scientists responsible have been dismissed from Imperial service. Sarah suspected that dismissed was a euphemism for something far more permanent, but she pressed on. She needs closure. She needs to know what happened to her children, and she needs to properly mourn them. That would require explaining the situation to her. The Nethasari are telepathic among their own kind, but we have no way to communicate complex concepts to her. Sarah stood slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. I might be able to help with that. Over the next hour, Sarah explained her background as a veterinarian and her observations of interspecies communication patterns. The Emperor listened with growing fascination as she described the subtle ways humans had learned to read emotional states in other species. The Nethasari communicate through a combination of vocalizations, electromagnetic field modulation, and bioluminescent pattern displays, the Emperor said thoughtfully. Our translation systems can handle the vocal components, but the other elements have always been beyond our capabilities. Humans process multiple sensory inputs differently than Zephyrians, Sarah explained. Our neural dampeners might actually help. They force us to rely more heavily on intuition and pattern recognition rather than pure logical analysis. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic images of Cyrillith species in their natural environment. Finally, he spoke. What would you need? Access to Cyrillith without barriers, a translation interface that can convert basic concepts into her vocalizations, and Sarah hesitated, knowing this next request might be too much. Continue. The remains of her children, if they still exist. She needs to be able to say goodbye properly. The Emperor's scales shifted to a deep purple, an emotional display that Sarah had learned indicated profound consideration. The first two requirements can be arranged. The third. The remains were disposed of according to standard laboratory protocols. There is nothing left to recover. Sarah felt her heart sink, but then another idea struck her. What about genetic material, even fragments? Possible why? In human cultures, we often create memorials for the lost. Physical objects that represent those we've loved and can never see again. If I could create something that carries the genetic essence of her children, not to bring them back, but just as a remembrance, it might help her process her grief. The Emperor stared at her for a long time. You would risk your life to comfort a creature that could easily destroy you. She's not a creature, Sarah said firmly. She's a mother who lost her children. That transcends species. Indeed it does, the Emperor murmured. Very well. Tomorrow we will attempt something that has never been tried before. We will ask a Nethasari for forgiveness, and we will trust a human to serve as our voice. As guards escorted Sarah back to her quarters, under protective custody rather than arrest, she felt a mixture of terror and excitement. Tomorrow, she would either accomplish something truly remarkable or die trying. But for the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. In the Chamber of Sorrows, Cyrillith raised her great head as if sensing the change in the air. Her scales rippled with colors that had not been seen in years, the deep golds and brilliant blues of hope restored. She settled back onto her resting platform, but not in her familiar pose of grief. Tonight, she rested like a queen preparing for a long-awaited conversation. The palace hummed around them all, its ancient systems carrying whispers of the unprecedented event to come. In the morning, human compassion would meet alien intellect, and together they would attempt to heal wounds that had festered for far too long. Tomorrow, the dragon would finally learn the truth about her children, and perhaps, with the help of an unlikely human ally, she would find a way to transform her endless sorrow into something resembling peace. The morning of the encounter arrived with an unusual stillness throughout the palace. Emperor Kethvar had cleared all non-essential personnel from the Chamber of Sorrows, leaving only a small team of technicians, his most trusted advisor Yithkaller and Sarah. Sarah stood before the energy barrier that had separated her from Cyrillith for months, watching the magnificent Nethasari pace restlessly. The dragon seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. Her scales shifted through a complex pattern of colors, anticipation mixed with wariness, hope tinged with ancient pain. The translation interface is calibrated, reported the chief technician. We've programmed it with every known Nethasari vocalization pattern from our historical databases. However, we cannot guarantee accuracy for emotional or abstract concepts. That's where I come in, Sarah said, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. She wore a specially modified translation collar that would convert her words into Nethasari vocalizations while simultaneously analyzing Cyrillith's responses. Emperor Kethvar approached her, carrying a small crystalline container. Inside was a shimmering, pearl-like substance that seemed to glow with its own inner light. This contains genetic material from all 5 of her children, he said quietly. Our scientists were able to reconstruct it from laboratory residue. It's not enough to clone or resurrect them, but it carries their essential biological signature. Sarah accepted the container with trembling hands. And you're certain this will read as familiar to her? Nethasari have extraordinary sensory capabilities, Yithkalar explained. She will be able to detect the genetic markers of her offspring even in this processed form. Sarah nodded and turned toward the barrier control. Deactivate the energy field. Are you certain about this? The Emperor asked one final time. Cyrillith is in considerable emotional distress. If she perceives threat or deception, she could easily kill you before we could reactivate the barriers. She won't hurt me, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. She's been waiting for someone to listen to her. I'm just going to give her that chance. The energy barrier dissolved with a barely audible hum, and for the first time in 3 years, nothing separated Sarah from the most dangerous creature in the Imperial Palace. Cyrillith froze, her massive form going completely still as she processed this unexpected development. Sarah stepped into the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The dragon was even more magnificent up close. Her scales caught and reflected the chamber's lighting in ways that created patterns of living art across her hide. But it was her eyes that captured Sarah's attention. Ancient, intelligent, and filled with a depth of sorrow that made Sarah's heart ache. "Hello, Cyrillith," Sarah said softly, the translation collar converting her words into a series of melodic tones that seemed to resonate through the chamber. "My name is Sarah. I know you've been calling for your children. I'm here to tell you about them." The dragon's head tilted slightly, those enormous eyes focusing intently on Sarah's face. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder mixed with whale song, hauntingly beautiful even as it carried the weight of years of grief. "You speak the old words," the translation collar interpreted. "But you are not Nethasari. What manner of being are you?" "I'm human," Sarah replied. "I'm from a world very far from here. I came to this place as a servant, but I've been watching you. I've seen your pain. I think I know what happened to your children." Cyrillith's scales rippled, colors shifting to deeper hues. "My young ones? Where are my young ones? I call to them in the deep night, but they do not answer. The metal-skinned ones took them when they were still in their shells. They said they would be safe." Sarah felt tears running down her face. The translation collar was capturing not just Cyrillith's words, but the emotional undertones of her vocalizations, and the raw pain was overwhelming. "They're gone, Cyrillith," Sarah said gently. "Your children. They didn't survive. The ones who took them, they made a terrible mistake. They were trying to study something, and your bobbies died because of it." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Cyrillith's great form seemed to shrink in on itself, and for a moment Sarah feared the dragon might collapse from the weight of confirmed loss. But when Cyrillith spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. "I knew," she whispered. "In the deep places of my heart, I knew they were gone, but I could not stop calling for them. I could not stop hoping that the metal-skinned ones spoke truth." Sarah approached slowly, the genetic container held carefully in her hands. "I brought you something. The ones who took your children, some of them kept pieces. Not enough to bring them back, but enough for you to sense them one more time." She held out the crystalline container, and Cyrillith lowered her massive head to examine it. The dragon's nostrils flared, and her entire body went rigid. When she looked up at Sarah, her eyes were filled with something beyond mere gratitude. "I smell them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My first daughter who would have been strong, my second daughter who would have been wise, my sons who would have sung the old songs with me." Her great head drooped. "They are truly gone, but they were real, they were mine." Cyrillith gently took the container in her claws, holding it against her chest where Sarah could see a specialized organ that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. The light pulsed in complex rhythms. What Sarah realized must be a necessary funeral song. "How long?" Cyrillith asked after the song concluded. "How long has it been since they died?" Sarah consulted the timeline she had memorized. 3 years. You've been mourning them for 3 years. 3 years of calling to silence, Cyrillith mused. 3 years of hopping for voices that would never answer. She looked at Sarah with something approaching wonder. "Why do you tell me this truth? Your kind serves the metal-skinned ones. Why bring pain to ease pain?" "Because you deserve to know," Sarah said simply. "Because no mother should have to wonder about her children forever. And because—" She paused, struggling to find words that would translate properly. "Because sometimes the truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing that can set us free." Cyrillith was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah with those ancient eyes. "Your people must be very wise." "Not always," Sarah admitted. "We make mistakes too. We hurt each other, sometimes without meaning to, but we try to learn from those mistakes. We try to do better." "The metal-skinned one who rules this place," Cyrillith said. "He knew of this deception." Sarah glanced toward the observation area where Emperor Kethvar watched. "He learned the truth when I did. He's the one who made it possible for me to come to you today. He's the one who ordered the genetic material preserved for you." Cyrillith's gaze followed Sarah's, and for a moment, Emperor and Dragon regarded each other across the chamber. When Cyrillith spoke again, her voice carried a formal quality that the translation collar marked as ceremonial speech. "Emperor of the metal-skinned ones," she said, "I grieve for my lost children, but I do not hold you responsible for their death. The fault lies with those who acted in shadow and deception. You have given me the gift of truth and the blessing of proper mourning. This debt I acknowledge." The Emperor stepped to the chamber's threshold. "Cyrillith of the Nethasari, the injustice done to you and your children stains the honor of my empire. I cannot restore what was taken, but I offer what recompense I can. What would you ask of me?" Cyrillith considered this question for a long time, her scales shifting through patterns that spoke of deep thought. Finally, she spoke. "I would ask to go home," she said, "to the gas clouds of Nethi's prime, where my people ride the storm winds and sing the songs of the ancients. I would ask to carry the memory of my children back to the place where they would have learned to fly." "It will be done," the Emperor replied immediately. "A ship will be prepared for your journey with all honors befitting your station." And Cyrillith continued, her gaze returning to Sarah. "I would ask that this small wise one be granted freedom as well. She has shown me that there are beings in this wide universe who understand that kindness has power beyond any weapon." Sarah felt her heart skip. Freedom from the servant program had seemed impossible. Humans were considered too valuable as laborers to release. "This too will be granted," the Emperor said, and Sarah saw surprise ripple through his advisor's expression. "Sarah of Earth has demonstrated wisdom and compassion that honor both our species. She will be given passage to any world she chooses, with full citizenship rights in the Empire should she desire them." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her circumstances. Cyrillith began to sing again, a different song this time, one that spoke of journeys and new beginnings. As her voice filled the chamber, her scales shifted to colors of hope and possibility, the first time Sarah had seen such hues on the great dragon. "There is one more thing," Cyrillith said when her song concluded. "I would like to take this small wise one with me to Nethi's prime, if she is willing. My people should meet the human who taught an old mother that grief shared becomes grief diminished." Sarah looked up at the magnificent creature who had become, in these brief moments, something approaching a friend. "I would be honored," she said. As the arrangements began for Cyrillith's return home and Sarah's unprecedented journey to the Nethasari homeworld, word of the encounter spread throughout the palace. The other human servants could hardly believe that one of their own had not only survived direct contact with the Emperor's dragon, but had somehow managed to secure freedom for herself and justice for a grieving mother. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the change in Emperor Kethvar himself. He had witnessed something unprecedented, a human displaying the kind of empathy and wisdom that his own highly advanced civilization had failed to recognize. It was a lesson that would reshape his understanding of the species he had considered primitive. 3 days later, as Cyrillith prepared for her departure, she sought out Sarah one final time. The dragon's scales now showed patterns of serene contentment, a radical transformation from the endless grief that had characterized her captivity. The metal-skinned ones will remember this, she told Sarah. They will remember that a small being with a large heart accomplished what all their science and technology could not. You have given me the greatest gift possible, the ability to mourn properly and then move forward. You gave me something too, Sarah replied. You showed me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply witness someone else's pain and acknowledge it. As Cyrilith's transport ship lifted away from the palace, carrying the Nethasari home to her people and Sarah toward adventures she could never have imagined, the Chamber of Sorrows stood empty for the first time in decades. The silence was no longer ominous, it was peaceful. And throughout the palace, the story spread of how a human servant had accomplished the impossible. She had looked at a being completely unlike herself, recognized their pain as universal, and found a way to heal wounds that had seemed permanent. It was a story that would be told throughout the empire for generations to come, a reminder that wisdom and compassion were not the exclusive domain of any single species. In the vast expanse of space, two unlikely friends journeyed toward a new world, carrying with them proof that understanding between species was not only possible but could transform the universe itself, one act of kindness at a time.